The porch light was still on when Louis and Marjorie Henderson vanished from the quiet Jefferson Park neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky, population 36,000. The night of July 3, 1950, the air was filled with preparations for Independence Day throughout the streets. The smell of freshly cut grass mingling with the scent of smoke from backyard barbecues. At 9:15 p.m., their neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, saw Marjorie through the kitchen window, folding a tablecloth, while Louis poured more coffee and turned down the radio playing the evening news. That was the last image anyone saw of them. A beloved couple, always punctual and considerate. The next morning, the lights in the house were still on. The Ford was still in the garage, and the morning newspaper was still lying untouched on the porch. What happened in the next 72 hours would become the darkest mystery Louisville had ever witnessed. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Louisville, Kentucky, summer of 1950. The southern U.S. city was in the process of recovering from the war, life returning to the characteristically slow pace of the region. Along the cobblestone streets, coffee shops opened early, streetcars clanged across the Ohio River Bridge, and in suburban neighborhoods like Jefferson Park, people still maintained old routines every evening. Men tended gardens, women did laundry, children played on the sidewalks until dusk. In that quiet neighborhood, the Henderson family was known for being orderly and gentle. Louis Henderson, 48 years old, worked as an accountant at a small trading company in the city. His wife Marjorie, 45 years old, was a seamstress at a workshop. Beloved by many for her careful nature and habit of greeting everyone each morning. They lived in a two-story white-painted wooden house at 214 Jefferson Park, along with their youngest son Charles, 23 years old. The eldest son Michael was married and lived in the neighboring district. On that early July evening, before the Independence Day holiday, neighbors saw Louis and Marjorie in the backyard, chatting cheerfully and mentioning plans to head to Lake Nolan for a few days to cool off. The weather was stifling, cicadas droning, and the wind carrying the smell of distant smoke. The living room light stayed on late into the night, everything seeming as normal as any other day. The next morning, the newspaper delivery boy noticed the Courier-Journal still untouched on the steps. By noon, the Henderson house was still silent, curtains drawn. Night fell, the house lights still on, the gray Chevrolet parked intact in the garage. For 2 straight days, they did not show up at work, did not contact anyone. Neighbors began to gossip, some saying they had gone away, others sensing something ominous. The Henderson home phone rang with no one answering. Charles, the youngest son, told neighbors that his parents went on vacation to Bowling Green and would return soon. His voice calm as if nothing was unusual. However, the eldest brother Michael grew worried. He called multiple times, sent telegrams, but received no response. By the evening of July 5, 1950, when the phone in the Henderson house rang again with no one picking up, Michael Henderson knew this had gone beyond normal. He drove to Jefferson Park, stood in front of the still-lit but deathly silent house, then turned back and called the Louisville Police Department to report his parents missing. The call was received at 10:18 p.m. Noted briefly in the duty log, missing persons report, 2 adults, address 214 Jefferson Park. The night shift passed the information to the Criminal Investigation Division the next morning for verification. A file was opened, numbered JPD 5412, and assigned to Sergeant Frank Mallory, a man with over 10 years of experience in civil investigations. Upon receiving the assignment, Mallory thought this might just be a case of leaving without notice, common after long holidays. However, he decided to conduct a field check that very morning of July 6. Jefferson Park was quiet in the morning. American flags still hanging from every porch, maple trees casting shade on the roads. House number 214 showed no signs of disturbance. The morning paper was untouched on the steps, the living room light still on, curtains closed. Mallory knocked several times with no answer. A woman from across the street approached Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, saying that their youngest son, Charles, was still living there. After a few minutes of waiting, the door opened. Charles Henderson appeared in casual clothes, looking sleepy, saying he had just woken up and hadn't heard the knocking. When asked about his parents, Charles replied that they had left the house early on the morning of July 4th to vacation in Bowling Green with an old couple of friends. He said they often did this on holidays and might be delayed due to traffic. Mallory requested to enter and inspect inside. The house was clean, furniture neat, no signs of break-in or items disturbed. The kitchen dining table still had 2 sets of dishes, a coffee pot on the stove, dried food hardened on the plates. In the bedroom, Louis and Marjorie's clothes and luggage were still there, windows closed, wardrobe slightly ajar. In the basement, everything orderly, the concrete floor with faint skid marks, but unclear cause. Mallory checked the garage. The 4-seat Chevrolet was still there, locked tight, no signs of recent movement. Everything he noted contradicted the travel vacation hypothesis. When asked one last time if his parents had said anything about the trip, Charles repeated that they only mentioned it briefly, and he didn't know the names of the 2 friends. Mallory noted in his book, "Statement unverified, needs confirmation." Before leaving, he asked Charles to provide a contact list for his parents, including colleagues, friends, and relatives. Charles said he would find it and send it later. Mallory left Jefferson Park at noon, standing on the tree-shaded walkway and looking back at the daytime lit house. No signs of hasty departure, no evidence of criminal activity, but the whole scene was too silent, too fixed, as if time in this house had stopped since the night of July 3rd. Back at headquarters, Mallory completed the initial report. 2 persons missing, departure location undetermined, personal vehicle still at home, youngest son cooperative, but lacking details. Scene quiet, no signs of struggle. Recommended opening an official missing persons file and proceeding with basic information collection. Verify workplaces, bank, Lake Nolan area, and social connections of the 2 victims. The Henderson case was officially recorded in the Louisville Police Department's Civil Investigation Catalog, marking the starting point for a file that would later span decades. Immediately after the Henderson couple's missing persons file was opened, Sergeant Frank Mallory began deploying search efforts in the direction provided by their youngest son, Charles. The supposed destination of the Lake Nolan area, over 90 miles south of Louisville. On July 7, 1950, an official notice was sent to police in neighboring counties, requesting assistance in scanning major routes and lakeside rest areas. The same day, 2 patrol units and a volunteer rescue team were mobilized, coordinating with local authorities in Grayson County. Descriptions of the 2 missing persons were posted at gas stations, post offices, and restaurants along Highway 31W. Louis Henderson, 48 years old, about 5'11" inches tall, slim build, graying hair. Marjorie Henderson, 45 years old, average build, light blonde hair, often wearing metal-rimmed glasses. Their personal vehicle, a gray Chevrolet, was still in the garage, so the left with others hypothesis was temporarily considered. For 3 consecutive days, search teams swept along the lake shore, checking private cabins and camping areas. Caretakers said they had not seen any couple matching the description during that time. Motel owners around the town of Clarkson also confirmed no guests named Henderson had registered. Police even expanded the scope to small ferry docks, questioning boatmen, but no one had encountered them. In Louisville, Mallory had officers recheck fuel purchase records on Louis' regular customer card at the local gas station. No transactions after July 3rd. At the lake area, sweltering weather made the search difficult, but teams continued scanning around the water's edge. On the 4th day, a rescue worker discovered a piece of fabric caught on a branch near the water's edge, about half a mile from the boat dock. The light blue floral fabric, frayed and mud-stained, was thought to possibly belong to women's clothing. Police sealed the sample, documented it, and sent it to the Kentucky State Lab for fiber analysis. News of the disappearance began to spread. The Courier-Journal ran a short article inside Louisville couple mysteriously missing after holiday. Police expand search to Lake Nolan. Some local residents joined as volunteers, bringing wooden boats and flashlights to search along trails around the lake. But after nearly a week, all efforts yielded no results. No vehicle traces, no personal items, no one remembered seeing the two. The lab sent preliminary results. The fabric could not be identified by origin, only concluded to be common cotton type. No hair or blood traces found. Mallory returned to Louisville to compile data. The scattered information obtained did not advance the case. From statements by Louis and Marjorie's colleagues, neither had mentioned any trip, left no notes or letters. In internal notes, Mallory wrote a short line: no traces of departure, no direct witnesses, no verified destination. That terse line closed the initial scene investigation phase, but also opened a clear sense of deadlock throughout the entire investigation unit. Calls to gas stations, ferries, hotels around Louisville all yielded nothing. No one had seen the Henderson couple, nor was there any evidence they had left the city. After more than a week of fruitless searching, Sergeant Frank Mallory decided to return to the starting point, the Henderson family home in Jefferson Park. He believed that if there was an answer to this disappearance, it lay not at Lake Nolan or on the highways, but in that overly quiet house itself. On July 15, 1950, Mallory, along with 2 criminal forensics officers, conducted a detailed examination. The weather that day was sweltering, with light drizzle, the smell of damp earth mixing with old paint as they opened the door and stepped inside. The house was almost unchanged since Mallory's first inspection, furniture neat, curtains still drawn, and the air in the rooms seemingly thickened. He began taking careful notes, going room by room according to procedure. In the living room, the bookshelf and family photo frames were wiped clean, but on the mantelpiece there was a thin layer of dust, different in color from the rest of the room. Mallory bent down to observe, noticing ash and soot scattered on the floor. Even though it was midsummer, no one would light a fire in July in Louisville. He asked Charles about it, and the son replied that it might be from Dad testing the chimney. The answer prompted Mallory to note it immediately in his notebook. Moving to the kitchen, he saw the half-eaten meal still there as before. Only now the food was hardened and faintly odorous. One of the 2 glasses on the table had a stain as if it had been hastily rinsed. In the back hallway, a section of wall near the basement door had fresh paint, brighter than the rest, clearly recently applied. Mallory requested the technician take photos, mark the location, and document the condition. They opened the door to the basement. Dim light made everything hazy, the space cold and heavily musty. The concrete floor was mottled, with a long streak from the base of the stairs to the eastern wall corner, where there were faint skid marks as if something heavy had been dragged across. In the corner was a stack of old newspapers, a few open bags of coal, and a shovel still dusted with white powder. Mallory examined the area, using a flashlight to scan the floor closely, spotting small dark streaks at the edge of the stair treads. He picked up a piece of fabric hidden under a wooden chair, a handkerchief with a faded pattern, stiffened by dark brown stains. The sample was sealed on the spot. The entire basement was photographed and documented. Back in the living room, Mallory noticed another oddity. On the wooden table near the window was a circular mark brighter than the surroundings, as if a cylindrical object had been placed there for a long time and recently removed. Unclear what it was, but he marked it on the scene diagram. After completing the inspection, the forensics team collected ash samples from around the fireplace, wall paint chips, white dust from the basement, and the handkerchief to send to the state crime lab in Frankfurt. In the report sent out, Mallory requested priority testing for biological traces on the fabric. 3 days later, preliminary results came back. The Kastle-Meyer test was positive for human blood. The blood type could not yet be determined, but this discovery was enough to shift the perspective on the case. Mallory submitted the report to his superiors, emphasizing the anomalies in the house and the possibility of criminal activity. In the statement, he wrote, "Fireplace shows signs of out-of-season burning. Basement has drag marks. Items inconsistent with normal living. Human blood detected. Need to expand criminal investigation. From what seemed a simple missing persons case, the Henderson incident began to take on a far more serious tone. Mallory kept a spare key to the house to ensure the scene was not further disturbed, while requesting the basement area be sealed until further conclusions. That night, he returned to the station, sitting to record the full work log under the pale yellow desk lamp. Among the meticulous notes, one sentence was underlined twice. No one left this house without leaving a trace. When the forensic results confirmed the brown stain on the handkerchief was human blood, it forced Sergeant Frank Mallory to change his approach. He believed re-verifying the statement of the only person still living in the house was essential. On July 20, 1950, Charles Henderson was summoned to the Louisville Police Department for an official interview. In the record, Mallory clearly stated the purpose of the interrogation was to clarify details regarding the time the parents left the house and confirm the trip itinerary. Charles arrived on time, neatly dressed, appearing calm. He sat across from Mallory, hands clasped on the table. When asked initially, Charles repeated the answer he had given police before. His parents left the house early on the morning of July 4th to vacation in Bowling Green with two old family friends. They departed in their own car, taking luggage and planning to stay a few days. When Mallory pointed out that the family's Chevrolet was still in the garage, Charles hesitated, then said they might have gone with someone else or were picked up by friends. Mallory pressed for the names of the two friends, but Charles said he didn't remember clearly, only that they had visited once. Throughout the questioning, his voice was steady, but his eyes often shifted away. Mallory noticed this, noting every small detail in his notebook. After the initial statement, police cross-checked other information. They confirmed through the vehicle registry that the Hendersons' gray Chevrolet had not been registered for movement or maintenance that month. At Louis' workplace, no one knew of any trip, nor had anyone heard him mention going to Bowling Green. At Marjorie's sewing workshop, colleagues confirmed she had mentioned wanting to take a break after the holiday, but had not decided on a specific time or place. Police revisited Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the neighbor across the street, to clarify what she saw on the night of July 3rd. She said that around near midnight, while watering plants in the backyard, she saw smoke rising from the Henderson chimney, with firelight glowing red through the living room window. She remembered it clearly because the weather was hot, and no one would light a fire in midsummer. When asked why she didn't report it to police, she said she thought Louis might be burning trash or checking the fireplace. This information particularly caught Mallory's attention, as it matched the ash found around the fireplace during the examination. The next day, he had officers verify again at the building supply store on Market Street, where Charles often bought household items. The owner, Mr. George Latham, confirmed that on July 2nd, Charles had stopped by to purchase 2 bags of coal dust, 1 bag of white lime, and a small coil of rope. When asked the purpose, Charles said it was to deal with basement dampness. Latham remembered this because Charles paid in cash and was in a hurry. Mallory recorded the store owner's statement, along with the sales receipt still in the accounting ledger. The scattered pieces of information gradually formed a contradictory picture. Parents disappeared without luggage, the car still in the garage, while the son bought materials and lit a fire the night before. However, there was no direct evidence proving Charles was involved in a crime. It all remained at suspicion and coincidence. When invited for a second interview to clarify the new details, Charles became more irritated. He said the purchase of coal and lime was only to clean the basement due to humidity, and the fireplace fire was because Dad was testing the chimney. He completely denied any other inferences. Mallory asked further why he didn't report to police when his parents lost contact, and Charles replied that he thought they wanted a quiet few days. The interview ended after nearly 2 hours, with no new details. Mallory knew that under the legal framework at the time, detaining Charles was impossible without concrete evidence. He wrote in the report, only remaining relative statements inconsistent, unable to confirm destination and companions of the 2 victims. Scene and statements have many contradictions. insufficient grounds for criminal prosecution, but continued monitoring needed. The 8-page report was sent to command with a recommendation for unofficial surveillance of Charles Henderson. Finally, Mallory closed his notebook, thinking long and hard, before the last line he wrote in the record. Everything around the house fits together, except what Charles says. After completing the interviews with Charles Henderson and noting the many contradictions in his statements, Sergeant Frank Mallory decided to expand the investigation into the financial and personal relationships of the Henderson couple. He believed that if they had truly left the house voluntarily, as the son claimed, there must be signs of prior preparation, money, letters, or notifications at work. No one disappears completely without leaving a paper trail, especially in 1950s American society, when all transactions were manually recorded. On July 24th, Mallory visited the First National Bank branch in downtown Louisville, where Louis Henderson had maintained a savings account for years. The branch manager, Mr. Harmon Reese, after reviewing the records, confirmed that on July 1st, 3 days before the couple was last seen, Louis had withdrawn the entire savings balance, $2,380, equivalent to over 4 years of his accumulation. There were no subsequent deposits or transfers. When asked if Louis mentioned the purpose of the withdrawal, Reese said he only said it was for family matters, nothing more. Mallory requested copies of all withdrawal documents and signature comparisons. The handwriting matched Louis's personal records, ruling out forgery. However, the withdrawal with no subsequent spending led Mallory to conclude the money was not used for any trip. He sent inquiries to banks in Bowling Green and Elizabethtown, but none recorded new accounts or transactions matching the Henderson name in July. Next, Mallory turned to Marjorie's workplace. He visited Brooks and Company's sewing workshop, where she was an order manager, to verify leave requests. The owner, Mrs. Ruth Brooks, confirmed that Marjorie had not submitted any leave application nor left any messages. On July 5th, when she didn't show up, the office called home, but got no answer. She was always punctual, never missed work without notice, Mrs. Brooks said. Her voice full of concern. Marjorie's personnel file showed no summer vacation plans, no advance pay, or external document transfers. In the company mailbox, no letters addressed to her arrived after July 3rd. At the home, police rechecked Louis and Marjorie's desk drawers for handwritten letters, bills, or telegrams. All indicated they had no plans to leave Louisville. Mallory had officers scan Western Union telegraph records and post offices around Jefferson Park. No messages were sent or received to 214 Jefferson Park in the week before Independence Day. No packages or personal letters were held. Even the local newspaper they subscribed to was still delivered to the front door, unopened. These small details further reinforced the hypothesis that the two were not preparing for a trip. A family leaving voluntarily would take clothes, clean up, lock the door, and inform friends or colleagues. Here, none of those signs existed. To rule out debt or financial disputes, Mallory continued investigating local credit records. Louis had no bad debts or mortgaged assets. His salary at Brown and Turner Machinery was paid monthly by check, and the most recent paycheck, June 30, remained uncashed. That check was found in the desk drawer, envelope unopened. Marjorie received weekly cash pay, and her July 1st paycheck envelope was still in her purse, untouched. These details showed neither was preparing for a long absence. In internal criminal investigation division meetings, Mallory presented the new findings: 1 full savings withdrawal but no use. 2, no evidence. They left Louisville. 3, no leave plans or prior contact. 4, no letters or items indicating intent to travel far. All led to a temporary conclusion: the voluntary departure hypothesis was ruled out. To further solidify this, Mallory scanned the family's social circle. Louis' friends described him as calm, rarely going out. They had never heard of a Bowling Green trip or knew who the 2 old friends Charles mentioned were. A close colleague said that in the weeks before disappearing, Louis seemed anxious, often checking his watch, and appearing sleepless, but gave no reason. Marjorie, her colleagues, was cheerful, talking about remodeling the kitchen this fall, a sign she was planning for the future, not preparing to abandon everything. Compiling the data, Mallory wrote in the July 28, 1950, investigation report. No financial, administrative, or personal indicators prove intentional departure. Scene evidence and bank transactions show the two victims did not prepare for prolonged absence. Voluntary missing hypothesis completely ruled out. The final line in the record made him pause long before signing. If they didn't leave, it means they never left Louisville. By late July 1950, the Henderson couple's disappearance investigation had entered its fourth week with no signs of progress. All viable leads, from Lake Nolan, Highway 31W, to nearby towns, had been checked multiple times. The final forensic report on the lake fabric confirmed it was common cotton, containing no DNA or human hair. Fireplace ash samples also tested negative for organic traces, containing only pine wood and coal components. What initially seemed like clues had become a chain of disconnected data points. Sergeant Frank Mallory persistently reviewed the files day by day, line by line. He had officers recheck all bus stations and train depots around Louisville, but no tickets were purchased in the names of Louis or Marjorie Henderson. The Central Post Office confirmed no packages or letters were sent from their address after July 3. Every tracing effort led to the same conclusion: no evidence the two ever left the city, nor any trace they were harmed. Mallory had once proposed requesting a warrant to expand the search of the backyard at the Henderson home, but his superiors deemed it lacking legal grounds, as there were no witnesses or direct physical evidence. The city police department at the time was overwhelmed with numerous violent crimes and other missing persons cases, so the Henderson case gradually slipped down the priority list. Articles in the Courier-Journal and Louisville Times also stopped running after half a month, leaving only a few brief lines in the local incidents section. In mid-August, during a summary meeting at the Criminal Investigation Division, Mallory presented all the findings collected: no new witnesses, no traces of crime, no bank transactions, no communication activity after the disappearance. He admitted to his colleagues that the case had hit a dead end. Though he suspected Charles Henderson was hiding something, there was no evidence strong enough to charge or continue summoning him. The samples from the Henderson home were stored in the department's evidence locker, awaiting any future developments. On August 22, 1950, the Henderson case file was officially marked as completing the initial investigation phase. On the final page, Mallory wrote the standard administrative note: disappearance under unclear circumstances. Below it were his signature and that of the approving superior. That was how a case closed when there was nothing left to pursue. Charles Henderson, after completing some administrative procedures related to the property, left Louisville shortly thereafter. According to police information, he moved to Indianapolis, rented a room, and worked at a private machine shop. When asked the reason, he said he wanted to leave a place that held too many memories. Mallory could not stop him. He was not an official suspect, and the law did not allow detaining someone without specific charges. The house at 214 Jefferson Park remained vacant for a long time. Windows covered in dust, the backyard overgrown with weeds. Neighbors gradually stopped talking about it, treating the story as a sad mystery of the neighborhood. A few still remembered the firelight that once flickered from the chimney that night, but eventually fell silent, like everything else in this case. For Mallory, the Henderson case left an unrelenting sense of unease. He still carried the small notebook, in which the final line of the July report was underlined twice. No one leaves without leaving a trace, but sometimes the trace lies where no one looks. By September 1950, the file was officially transferred to the Louisville Police Department's archive, with case number LPD 5214. In the internal catalog, the incident was classified as an unresolved missing persons case. The evidence items, including the handkerchief, paint chips, ash, and scene photographs, were sealed in a wooden box and stored in the basement of headquarters. No one expected that those seemingly useless documents would lie dormant for decades, waiting for the day they would be reopened. For the Jefferson Park community, the name Henderson gradually faded from memory. The old house later changed hands to another family, and the story of the missing couple became a vague tale, told on summer afternoons, by the elderly in the neighborhood. The case closed quietly, without evidence, without answers, and without justice. An administrative note, disappearance under unclear circumstances, became the final period on the first chapter of a mystery Louisville would never forget. Years passed quietly, and the Henderson couple's disappearance slowly receded into Louisville's collective memory like an old story no one mentioned anymore. The house at 214 Jefferson Park, once the center of the investigation, had passed through many owners. New families came and went, each renovating, repainting, adding or removing parts of the house, gradually erasing all original traces. None of them knew that the place they lived in had once been the scene of an unsolved disappearance. The surrounding neighbors also changed over time. The old neighborhood was different now, and those who once knew the Henderson family well, like Mrs. Evelyn Brooks or Mr. Latham, had long since passed away. When the last witnesses left this world, the case seemed buried with them. The file with case number LPD 5214 was stored in the old records vault of the Louisville Police Department, in the east basement of headquarters. The wooden box had darkened to a deep brown, and on the lid remained Sergeant Frank Mallory's slanted handwriting, "Disappearance under unclear circumstances." Inside were faded black and white photographs, purple ink handwritten reports, gradually blurring, and sealed cloth bags containing the handkerchief and a few small samples. For over half a century, the file had never been reopened. No one in the department still remembered the case, nor knew that Mallory had died years earlier, carrying with him the unresolved torment. Louisville entered new decades with a more modern pace of life, and investigative technology evolved, but most old cases remained in the dark. Later generations of police occasionally saw the thick, dusty file boxes, like witnesses from a time before DNA or modern forensic testing. In a small corner of the storage room, the designation LPD 5214 still sat untouched on the metal shelf, and no one suspected that inside lay clues to a story forgotten for over half a century. In March 2005, when the Cold Case Review program was officially launched, the Louisville Police Department underwent a complete reorganization of all unsolved cases. Chief Harold Pierce, a veteran with over 30 years in the force who had directly handled many complex cases in Jefferson County, decided to form a small specialized unit called the Cold Case Review Unit. The team's goal was not to solve every old case, but to identify those with potential for reinvestigation based on preserved physical evidence. At the first internal meeting, Chief Pierce said a line that would later be quoted often: "No case is ever truly closed, only forgotten." Among the 212 files reviewed, the disappearance with case number LPD 5214, the Henderson case, drew attention due to the unusual notes from the original investigator, Sergeant Frank Mallory. The slanted handwritten lines, ash around the fireplace, drag marks in the basement, human blood on fabric, suggested this was more than a simple missing persons case. After reviewing the preliminary contents, Chief Pierce assigned the case to Detective Margaret Dean, an experienced investigator recently transferred from the Violent Crimes Unit to the Cold Case team. Dean, upon receiving the over 300-page yellowed file, spent many days rereading it in full. She meticulously noted in pencil in the margins, marking details Mallory had recorded but left unresolved. In his work log, Dean found the entry dated July 15, 1950. "No one left this house without leaving a trace." That sentence particularly caught her attention. She reviewed the scene photos, the living room with the untouched dining table, the fireplace with ash, the basement wall with fresh paint patches, and the handkerchief in the dusty sealed bag. Though 1950 forensic techniques were rudimentary, these details, by her investigative instinct, were strongly suggestive. In her internal report to Chief Pierce, Dean wrote clearly, "The Henderson case likely involves an undetermined crime, with a scene containing potentially overlooked evidence. Request permission to re-access the former residence for survey." Pierce approved and issued an official order for field investigation. Initially, Dean verified the current owners of 214 Jefferson Park, a young couple, the Whitmores, who had purchased it in 1998. When contacted, they were surprised to learn their home had once been the focus of a mid-20th century disappearance. However, they agreed to cooperate, allowing police to survey and record. Before visiting the scene, Dean and a forensic technician re-examined all the old evidence. The handkerchief was well preserved despite the years, and she sent a sample to the Kentucky State DNA Lab for modern analysis. At the same time, she compiled a list of details to check at the house: the fireplace area, the basement, and the repainted wall section mentioned in Mallory's report. On March 21, 2005, Detective Margaret Dean officially returned to the Jefferson Park address. The house retained the classic 1940s appearance, with a small front porch, weathered roof tiles, and a rusted iron fence. Stepping over the threshold, she felt a mix of familiarity and strangeness, a space that seemed peaceful, but weighed down by silence accumulated over more than half a century. Dean began recording every detail, from the fireplace location to the wooden stairs leading to the basement, carefully comparing them to the 1950 scene photos in Sergeant Mallory's file. Everything seemed unchanged, except for one small point: the wall section behind the fireplace had paint of a different shade, layered multiple times. As the forensic team finished measurements and prepared to leave, Dean lingered in front of that wall, staring long at the bricks that seemed mismatched with the old structure. She quoted Mallory's note from the file: "Fresh paint, possible concealment of unusual repair." The current owners, a middle-aged couple, confirmed the area had been replastered about 10 years earlier to fix cracks, but they had no idea what was inside. Dean nodded, requested the status quo be maintained, and scheduled a return the next morning. For the first time in months, she felt she had touched something real, a detail that could unlock the entire mystery buried for 55 years. The next day, under her order, a crew was brought in to assist in removing the old plaster to inspect the wall structure. As the hammer struck the first brick, fine lime dust filled the room, releasing a faint, musty, moldy smell. A worker, named Raul Vega, while removing cracked bricks, discovered something metallic clinking inside. They stopped. Dean approached and shone a flashlight through the gap, spotting a small rectangular object deep in the wall cavity. Carefully removing a few more bricks, they extracted an old tin box, the size of a notebook, its surface almost entirely rusted. The box was sealed on site and brought to the living room table. When the lid was opened, everyone fell silent. Inside were 3 items: a small piece of cloth with dried dark brown stains, a faded printed receipt on thick paper, signed C. Henderson, and a black and white photo of the very living room, taken toward the fireplace, showing 2 coffee cups and an open magazine on the table. Detective Dean used tweezers to remove each item and place them separately on sterile paper. The brown stain on the cloth resembled dried blood, and through the eyes of someone with years in the field, she knew this was more than just age. The receipt was read carefully: service and repair, masonry chimney restoration, paid in cash, the 2nd of July 1950. Signed, C. Henderson. Below was the faint stamp of a building supply store on Market Street, matching the location where Charles had purchased coal and white lime, according to 1950 statements. The photo particularly caught Dean's attention. On the back was scrawled handwriting in blue ink: "Before everything changed." It was unclear who wrote it, but it suggested more than a memory. Under a magnifying glass, she noticed an unusual detail. On the rug beneath the table was a faint dark streak that seemed unnoticed when the photo was taken. She immediately ordered the team to res-scan the corresponding area in the current living room. After clearing furniture, the forensic team applied luminol, a luminescent solution to detect blood traces, even if cleaned. When the lights went out, a pale blue glow gradually spread from the corner wall near the fireplace across the floor. forming long, winding patches around the baseboard. No one spoke, only the sound of Dean's pen scribbling continuously in her notebook. Those glowing streaks proved the presence of human blood here, even after more than half a century. Immediately afterward, surface samples were collected and sent to the Kentucky State DNA Lab for comparison with the old handkerchief sample. Dean also ordered the basement wall to be checked, as the chimney ran through that level. When shining light into the space behind the new plaster, the team discovered uneven cement, indicating a section had been patched with different material. The entire area was marked for expanded forensic examination. In the preliminary report submitted to the department, Dean wrote, "On March 22, 2005, at the 214 Jefferson Park scene, an old tin box was discovered containing evidence tied to 1950, a blood-stained handkerchief, a receipt signed C.C. Henderson, and a photo of the home's interior. Luminescence confirmed the presence of human blood around the fireplace area. Evidence suggests the house was a scene with traces deliberately erased." Chief Harold Pierce, upon receiving the report, ordered a temporary lockdown of the area for in-depth forensic analysis. Local media had not yet been informed, but within the department, everyone understood that the Henderson case, thought long forgotten, might now be a genuine criminal investigation. That afternoon, as Dean looked out through the old living room window, she imagined the scene in 1950, dim light from the table lamp, fireplace, smoke hazy in the stifling summer night, and somewhere in the house, something had happened and been concealed for over half a century. The chill down her spine made her realize that the real investigation was only just beginning. When the samples from 214 Jefferson Park were sent to the Kentucky State Forensic Laboratory, the entire investigation team understood that the upcoming results could completely change the nature of the case. For the first time in over half a century, organic evidence from 1950 was being tested using modern DNA technology. The handkerchief in the tin box and the blood detected via luminol around the fireplace were extracted and analyzed separately. 3 weeks later, on April 12, 2005, the forensic report was delivered directly to Detective Margaret Dean. The brief conclusion was enough to leave her stunned. DNA samples from evidence match blood relation within the Henderson lineage. The lab compared the genetic samples to DNA records from living relatives, a distant branch in Indianapolis, descendants of Michael Henderson, Charles's older brother. The results showed a 99.8% match, confirming that the blood on the handkerchief and under the wall belonged to direct family members. This meant that one or both of the missing persons had bled inside that very house. The report immediately prompted the Louisville Police Department to reclassify the case from disappearance under unclear circumstances to suspected homicide. Chief Harold Pierce signed the official decision to reopen file LPD 5214 as a criminal case. Dean, given full command of the investigation team, planned further physical evidence collection in the fireplace and floor areas, believed to be the epicenter of the traces. A special FBI forensic team was brought in with ground-penetrating radar to scan the structure beneath the ground floor concrete. This technology, typically used to detect buried remains or objects, was applied for the first time to an old case in Louisville. On April 20th, the equipment was deployed in the living room. The monitor consistently showed normal foundation structure until scanning the area directly in front of the fireplace, where Mallory had described a drag mark from the stairs to the wall corner. There, the radar image revealed an anomalous reflective zone, approximately 1.2 square meters in size, at a depth of about 30 centimeters. Recognizing the irregularity, the team decided to drill exploratory holes. When the thin concrete layer was broken, dark soil and numerous coal fragments were exposed beneath. The deeper they dug, the heavier the old burnt smell mixed with the dampness of time became. A technician bent down, using a small brush to sweep away fine ash, and suddenly uncovered scattered white bone fragments. Work halted immediately. The area was sealed, and the state forensic team was urgently summoned. Throughout the afternoon, Each layer of soil was meticulously peeled back. In addition to ash and bone fragments, they recovered 2 partially charred skull pieces and a small metal frame identified as the hinge of eyeglasses, identical to the metal-rimmed glasses described for Marjorie Henderson in the original file. All evidence was sealed in moisture-proof bags and transferred to the forensic lab in Lexington. There, Dr. Eleanor Briggs, a forensic anthropologist, reconstructed the bone fragments and analyzed remaining DNA samples. Though most material was carbonized, some fragments retained marrow, sufficient for genetic extraction. Preliminary results after nearly 2 weeks confirmed the bone ash contained 2 distinct DNA profiles, one male, one female. Comparison with Henderson family relatives indicated both were blood related to the lineage, most likely Louis and Marjorie Henderson. Additional physical analysis yielded chilling data. The bone fragments showed exposure to temperatures exceeding 700 degrees Celsius, enough to destroy nearly all soft tissue, indicating the bodies had been burned in a controlled environment, most likely inside the fireplace or coal storage. Several bone pieces also had clean mechanical cuts, suggesting intentional dismemberment or destruction of the bodies. Detective Dean received the report on the morning of May 8, 2005. She read and reread every line, her heart heavy. Every initial hypothesis Frank Mallory had in 1950, that something horrific had occurred in the house, was now proven correct. The evidence, though over half a century old, still spoke. The house had been the scene of a double murder, and the perpetrator had attempted to erase all traces by burning the bodies in their own fireplace. In an internal departmental briefing, Chief Pierce announced, "The Henderson case is officially reclassified as a homicide investigation, double victim case." The old file was renumbered LPD 05214R. An expanded investigation team was formed, including forensic experts, criminologists, and judicial history specialists. Their task was to identify the potential perpetrator and reconstruct the entire chain of events buried since 1950. That night, as Margaret Dean left the office, she paused before the only remaining clear black and white photo, the image of the Henderson living room. On the table, 2 coffee cups still sat side by side, as if steam still rose in memory. Now, that place had become evidence of a crime. From an unsolved disappearance, the Henderson case had been revived as a murder, with evidence that even time could not erase. After the forensic results confirmed the 2 victims were killed and their bodies burned inside their own home, Detective Margaret Dean returned to the original 1950 documents. She understood that to find the perpetrator, every detail in the initial file had to be retraced, where overlooked points were often the most critical. In the third-floor archive of the Louisville Police Department, brown document boxes lined the shelves, containing reports, interrogation transcripts, negatives, and handwritten notes from predecessors. Dean spread everything out on the table. The yellowed pages still bore clear handwriting. At the corner of each transcript was Sergeant Frank Mallory's signature, the man who had led the case in its early phase. She began with the 1950 scene diagram. Pencil lines detailed every room, the entrance, basement stairs, fireplace location. Comparing it to the 2005 technical drawings, Dean noticed a significant discrepancy in the wall behind the fireplace. The old diagram noted solid red brick construction with no added plaster, but the 2005 scene photos showed a dual-layer structure, inner cement, outer new brick. Records indicated this change occurred shortly after the disappearance. This raised the question, who had repaired the wall, and for what purpose? Continuing to the appendix, Dean found the interrogation transcripts of Charles Henderson, the victim's youngest son. The handwritten record, in faded purple ink, bore Mallory's confirming signature at the bottom. Charles stated his parents left early on the morning of July 4th to vacation in Bowling Green with friends. But more notable was Mallory's marginal note, contradictions regarding transportation, luggage, and departure time. Requires further verification. In an attached sheet, Mallory added, no friends found matching names provided by Charles, car and luggage still on site. Reading this, Dean clearly sensed that as early as 1950, the youngest son had been a suspect, only lacking concrete evidence. Moving to the scene log, she discovered a thin notebook clipped into the file, with an old leather cover and singed corners. The first line on the opening page was dated July 8, 1950. In hurried penmanship, Mallory wrote, "Sun burned fire all night, claimed to repel mosquitoes. Neighbor confirmed smoke from chimney in midsummer." In the next entry, he added, "Thick smoke, firelight reflected through window, unreasonable in weather conditions." The final line on the page was just 3 words. "Do not believe." Dean read these lines repeatedly. They perfectly matched the 2005 statement from Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the neighbor who had seen chimney smoke on the night of July 3rd. Now, with forensic science confirming bodies were burned in the fireplace, Mallory's observations had become prophetic evidence of what he had suspected. She continued examining the negatives of the house photos, the black and white frames clear under the light box. In one basement image, Dean noticed an anomaly. The wall near the flue had darker cement texture than the rest, identical to the area detected by ground-penetrating radar this year. When enlarged, she saw outlines as if a section had been hollowed out and patched. From the current perspective, everything aligned. Deline organized the information. Chimney smoke on the night of disappearance. Charles purchasing coal and white lime 2 days prior, the chimney repair receipt signed by him, blood in the house, and now bone ash with 2 DNA profiles. Everything converged on one point. The crime did not occur elsewhere but inside the house at the hands of the youngest son. She noted in her interim analysis report, data from original file indicates preparation, concealment, and scene processing, possibly originating from Charles Henderson. Details regarding smoke, chimney repair, and material purchases match current physical evidence. High probability suspect staged a false scene to depict voluntary parental departure. Upon completing the report, Detective Margaret Dean sat silently for a long time in her office. All leads pointed to one name: the family's youngest son, who had appeared at the center of the 1950 file and then vanished from Louisville as if he had never existed. She wondered whether he was still alive or merely a shadow in the blurred lines of archived time. After weeks of searching and cross-referencing, Dean decided to launch a comprehensive verification of Charles Henderson. The Civil Records Department reported he had left Louisville in late 1950, lived in Indianapolis for decades, but no official death record was registered there. A deceased 1998 entry in an old insurance report turned out to be an administrative error. Her intuition rising, Dean reopened the statewide resident database, cross-checking old Social Security numbers. The result made her pause. A person with matching name, birth date, and ID was currently registered as a resident at St. Matthew's Nursing Home on the outskirts of Louisville. She immediately verified through local authorities. The result confirmed Charles Henderson, born September 3, 1927, was still alive, 78 years old, in poor health, with no close relatives, receiving state-funded care. This information stunned the entire investigation team. The individual suspected in the 1950 file, toward whom all evidence was now pointing, was living less than 10 miles from the crime scene. Chief Harold Pierce approved the official request to collect Charles's DNA sample and handwriting documents for comparison with the C. Henderson signature on the tin box receipt. On June 2, 2005, Dean and a forensic officer visited St. Matthew's Nursing Home in plain clothes. She carried a summary file, authorization papers, and a sample collection kit. Charles Henderson was described as quiet, with declining memory due to age, but still responsive to simple questions. When Dean arrived, he was sitting by the window reading a newspaper, his thin hands wrinkled like paper. She briefly introduced herself as inquiring about an old matter related to the Jefferson Park house. Charles looked up, his eyes flickering briefly, but nodded in agreement to cooperate. The conversation lasted no more than 10 minutes, mainly to verify identity and timeline of leaving Louisville. When asked about his parents, he only said softly, "They went on vacation, and never came back. I never understood what happened. With his permission, the forensic team collected an oral swab for DNA analysis and gathered several handwritten documents from the facility, short letters to staff, medical registration forms, and a personal notebook. Charles showed no resistance, asking only one question before Dean left. "Will anyone know about this?" she replied. "Only if the truth needs to be told." 3 weeks later, the forensic results were sent to the Kentucky State Crime Lab. Comparative analysis showed Charles's DNA fully matched the biological traces remaining on the receipt signed C. Henderson. On the old paper, despite only faint dried sweat and microscopic skin cells, modern spectral scanning technology was sufficient to extract the DNA sequence. The match was 100% across 24 comparison points. Simultaneously, the handwriting analysis lab completed its comparison. When matching the C. Henderson signature from the 1950 receipt with Charles's recent documents from the nursing home, the expert concluded high similarity, including right-slanted script spacing between H and pressure on the downstroke of D, probability of same author, over 95%. The parallel reports were sent directly to Detective Dean and Chief Pierce. In the internal meeting on June 28, 2005, Pierce read the conclusion aloud to the entire team. DNA and handwriting both confirmed Charles Henderson as the signer of the chimney repair receipt found in the evidence box. The receipt date matches the night of the disappearance. No one in the room said anything more. The scattered facts from 55 years ago had now formed a seamless line. Following procedure, Dean established an official suspect file numbered LPD 05214C01, stating Henderson, Charles, male, white, born 1927, residing at St. Matthew's Care Home, Louisville, status alive, primary suspect in double homicide case. She attached all analysis documents, copies of the receipt, and DNA and handwriting results. That evening, Dean sat in her office, looking through the frosted glass window where the city of Louisville gradually sank into golden lights. She knew what was coming would no longer be merely a reinvestigation. It was reopening a dark chapter in the history of this very place. A 78-year-old son, living quietly in a nursing home, now stood as the suspect in the murder of his own parents over half a century ago. When signing the final submission to the Jefferson County Prosecutor's Office, Dean added a short note. Every last trace leads back to that house and to the one who never left it. On July 5, 2005, exactly 55 years after the disappearance was recorded, Detective Margaret Dean, along with 2 Louisville Police Department investigators, officially conducted the first interrogation of Charles Henderson, the primary suspect in the case. The session took place in his private room at St. Matthew's Nursing Home, fully video and audio recorded per regulations. Despite his advanced age, Charles maintained an unusual calm. He sat in an armchair, holding a glass of water, eyes directed toward the window where morning sunlight streamed in. Dean began with gentle questions, confirming identity, age, birthplace, and life history after 1950. Charles answered clearly, occasionally with a slight smile, as if to prove his memory was still sharp. When asked about the night of July 3, 1950, he paused for quite a while, then spoke slowly. "I remember it was hot. My parents said they were going away for a few days. They told me not to stay up late. The next morning, they were gone." His voice was steady, without hesitation, but his eyes avoided Dean's gaze. She moved to more specific details. "Do you remember who picked them up? What vehicle did they leave in?" "No, I didn't see. I woke up late. Their car was still in the garage. I thought friends drove them." "Do you remember the names of those friends?" "Not clearly, maybe old friends of Dad's." The answers were identical to the 1950 file statements, but to Dean they now sounded hollow and suspiciously so. When she presented a copy of the chimney repair receipt with his signature, Charles glanced at it and said, "I don't remember. Maybe I fixed it because smoke was leaking into the house." The fireplace was old back then. Dean remained silent, only nodding, then placed the black and white photo of the living room, the one found in the tin box, on the table. "Do you recognize this room?" Charles looked for a moment and nodded slightly. "That was our old house." The handwriting on the back. "Before everything changed, whose is it?" "Not mine," he said quickly, his eyes visibly shifting. When Dean presented the DNA and handwriting results, Charles looked down at the table, his fingers lightly tapping the glass rim. "Do you know that the signature on the receipt and the DNA on it both match you?" "If I signed it, it was just for house repairs," he replied, his voice turning hoarse. "The receipt is dated July 2nd, 1950, one day before neighbors saw smoke rising from your chimney. Do you remember why you lit a fire in the middle of summer?" Charles looked up, silent for a few seconds, then said softly, "I don't remember clearly. Maybe I started a fire because there were a lot of mosquitoes." That answer plunged the room into silence. Dean opened Sergeant Frank Mallory's old notebook and read slowly. "Sun burned fire all night, claimed to repel mosquitoes." Then she looked directly at Charles. "Do you know who wrote this line?" He closed his eyes, nodded slightly, lips pressed tight. "Mallory," he whispered. "He never believed me." Dean did not interrupt, only gently continued. "We excavated the area behind the fireplace, found bone ash from 2 people, 1 male, 1 female. DNA matches your parents. Do you have anything to say?" Charles gripped the armrest tightly, his body trembling slightly. After a moment he only said, "I don't know anything. They left, and I never saw them again." The answer remained the same, but now it sounded like a fragile shield between him and the exposed truth. Dean set the file down, her voice calm but firm. "No one goes on vacation, leaving their car, luggage, and unclaimed paychecks. No one disappears with their blood on the walls, and no one vanishes right after their son buys lime and coal." Charles fell silent. After a while, he spoke slowly, almost in a whisper. "You know, back then no one believed me. Dad was strict, Mom was weak. I just wanted them to stop arguing." He stopped midway, his cloudy eyes turning toward the window. Dean asked, "Were they arguing that night, Charles?" "I don't remember," he replied, then turned away, his voice hoarse. The interrogation lasted nearly 2 hours. Throughout, Charles maintained a single version of the story. His parents left, and he knew nothing more. However, whenever Dean mentioned the fireplace, smoke, or wall repairs, he evaded, changed the subject, or fell silent. All psychological signs indicated he was concealing something, not age-related forgetfulness, but an old fear turned into reflex. Upon concluding the session, Dean wrote in the report, "Suspect continues to deny all involvement, but statements directly contradict physical evidence and 1950 documents. Defensive psychology, evasion, stress reactions when fireplace area mentioned. Preliminary conclusion, suspect engaged in concealing the truth about the deaths of Louis and Marjorie Henderson." That afternoon, Dean left the nursing home in silence. She paused in the hallway, looking back at the room where Charles still sat motionless, eyes fixed on the fading daylight. In that light, his figure blended with memories of a long-ago Louisville, where a house once blazed with fire and secrets buried in ash for half a century were now rising. After the contradictory interrogation with Charles Henderson, Detective Margaret Dean decided to strengthen the file by seeking additional witnesses and supporting evidence to move the case to prosecution. She understood that to obtain an arrest warrant for someone of advanced age, a stronger legal foundation than mere suspicion was required. The investigation team began rescreening the entire 1950 witness list, most of whom had passed away. However, cross-referencing Jefferson County resident data revealed one name still active in temporary residency records: Evelyn Brooks, the neighbor who lived across from the Hendersons. Now 92 years old, she resided at St. Andrew's Senior Living Facility, about 20 miles from downtown Louisville. Dean and an assistant investigator visited her in early August 2005. Mrs. Brooks greeted them with rare clarity for someone nearing 100. When Dean mentioned the Henderson name, the elderly woman's face briefly changed. "I remember," she said. her voice trembling slightly. That night was terribly hot. I couldn't sleep. Went out to water the backyard plants and saw smoke coming from their chimney. Dean opened her notebook, letting her continue. It wasn't light smoke. It was thick, black, and the living room light was unusually bright, like fire glowing out. I thought they were burning trash, but the smell was acrid, not like burning wood. Mrs. Brooks clearly recalled the time, around near midnight, July 3, 1950. I even heard metal clanging, then sudden silence. The next morning, their door was shut tight. I didn't see anyone leave. When Dean asked why she hadn't reported it to police, she only bowed her head. Back then, people didn't want to get involved in neighbors' business. I've regretted it my whole life. Her statement perfectly matched Sergeant Mallory's notebook entry. The line that had haunted Dean, "Sun burned fire all night," claimed to repel mosquitoes. The interview was fully video recorded and documented. The Judicial Investigation Unit later confirmed Mrs. Brooks's account had supplementary legal value due to alignment with existing data and prior official records. With her statement, Dean now had the only surviving eyewitness to the events of the disappearance night. In parallel with witness development, the forensic team continued examining the Louisville Police Department's old evidence storage, housing thousands of samples from pre-1960 cases. In a wooden crate labeled LPD 1950B, a technician found 4 small glass vials sealed with red wax, faded labels reading ash sample, fireplace, Henderson case. These were the ash samples Sergeant Mallory had collected around the fireplace in July 1950, long thought useless and forgotten for over half a century. The vials were urgently sent to the DNA lab in Lexington. Experts extracted remaining organic material from the ash. Though most was heat-destroyed, they isolated 2 comparable DNA segments. Results were released on August 18, 2005. The 2 DNA sequences fully matched the genetic profiles of victims Louis and Marjorie Henderson, previously identified in the excavation. This proved that body incineration did not occur partially, but that the entire act of corpse destruction took place in the living room fireplace on the night of July 3, 1950. Dean immediately submitted a comprehensive report to Chief Harold Pierce. In it, she listed the grounds proving murder and evidence concealment. 1. 1950 evidence. DNA matches the 2 victims. 2. Blood traces and bone ash discovered in 2005 prove the crime scene inside the house. 3. Chimney repair receipt signed C. Henderson matches Charles's DNA and handwriting. 4. Witness Evelyn Brooks confirms unusual smoke and firelight on the exact disappearance night. 5. Charles's contradictory statements from 1950 to present, and his status as the only person present at the scene, all formed a tightly linked chain of evidence. The Jefferson County Prosecutor's Office reviewed it within 3 days and approved an arrest warrant on grounds of suspicion of first-degree murder and corpse destruction to conceal crime. On the afternoon of August 21, 2005, Dean and 2 judicial officers signed the warrant request, approved the same day by Judge Robert Milner. In the submission, Dean wrote concisely but firmly, "After 55 years, the chain of physical evidence and independent witness testimony has closed the circle of time. The criminal act is determined to be intentional with clear concealment actions." Leaving the office, she stood silently gazing at the worn-cornered file, now twice as thick, with conclusions Mallory had hoped for but never had the chance to write. The arrest warrant for Charles Henderson was issued in silence, but for Dean, it was more than legal procedure. It was a historic moment where a Louisville mystery spanning half a century was finally pieced together by science, memory, and the persistence of those unwilling to let time bury the truth. On the morning of September 12, 2005, in the crisp early autumn weather of Louisville City Police executed the arrest of Charles Henderson at St. Matthew's Nursing Home under a Jefferson County court warrant. Detective Margaret Dean, the case lead, personally oversaw the execution of the warrant. 2 plainclothes officers arrived at 8:15 a.m., carrying valid paperwork and a detention order signed by Judge Robert Milner. Charles was sitting in the facility's common room, reading the morning paper when police entered. He showed no surprise, only lifting his head, his gaze slowly settling on the police badges. Upon hearing the warrant read, he quietly folded the newspaper, set it aside, and said softly, "I knew this day would come." The arrest proceeded orderly. Medical staff were present to ensure his health during transport. Charles Henderson, 78 years old, was escorted out of the facility under the stunned gazes of other elderly residents. Police did not handcuff him due to health reasons, but he was accompanied by 2 officers and placed in a department vehicle. He said nothing more, only looking out the window throughout the short drive to Louisville Police Headquarters, the same place where his parents had been reported missing over half a century earlier. At headquarters, processing was swift. Charles was charged with 3 main counts: obstruction of a criminal investigation, destruction and concealment of human remains, and evidence tampering in a murder case. Jefferson County Prosecutor Diane Ralston explained to the press, though the acts occurred decades ago, new evidence provides sufficient legal grounds for criminal prosecution. There is no statute of limitations for crimes where victims were killed and the perpetrator deliberately concealed them. That afternoon, the Louisville Police Department held a special press conference, a rare event, given the case's 55-year span. At the podium, Chief Harold Pierce stood beside Detective Margaret Dean. Behind them, a large board displaying a photo of the Jefferson Park house with the text, "Henderson Case, 1950-2005. Dozens of reporters from local TV stations, newspapers, and National Wire services were present, camera flashes firing continuously. Pierce began in a low but resolute voice. "Today, we announce that the disappearance of Louis and Marjorie Henderson, recorded on July 4, 1950, has been determined to be a homicide. The primary suspect, Charles Henderson, the youngest son of the 2 victims, was arrested this morning." The room fell silent for a few seconds, then erupted in murmurs and rapid typing. Pierce continued, "This is the result of months of investigative work, based on forensic evidence, witnesses, and historical records. We have closed a mystery spanning over half a century." Detective Dean was invited to speak. She briefly outlined the investigation process, from reopening the file in March, discovering the tin box behind the fireplace wall, DNA results, the surviving witness, to today's arrest. Her voice was calm but unable to hide emotion when she said, "Sergeant Frank Mallory once wrote in his notebook that no one left this house without leaving a trace. He was right. We were just the ones who found those traces again." The news spread rapidly. Within hours, local TV bulletins unanimously ran the headline, "Cold Case Louisville Solved. After 55 years, son arrested in parent's disappearance." The Courier-Journal, the paper that first reported the disappearance in 1950, republished the old house photo with the caption, "Finally, Jefferson Park has its answer." The Louisville community was shaken. Older residents recalled the time when the disappearance had the entire neighborhood buzzing. Many living near Jefferson Park, upon hearing the news, flocked to the old house, now temporarily sealed for evidence preservation. They gathered quietly in front of the fence, some bringing flowers, others just standing and staring at the silent home. A middle-aged woman told a reporter, "My mother used to say that night, smoke filled the whole area, everyone smelled something strange. Never imagined it would take 55 years to find out what really happened." National media quickly took notice. CBS News and the Associated Press ran nearly identical headlines. 1950 Louisville mystery turns to murder, elderly son charged. The case became one of the oldest cold cases solved using DNA technology in Kentucky history. Within the Louisville Police Department, the case was seen as proof of the importance of preserving old records and evidence. Chief Pierce added, "If the 1950 ash samples hadn't been stored, if that handkerchief hadn't been properly preserved, the truth might have remained buried forever. Justice sometimes arrives late, but it can still arrive." That evening, Detective Dean returned to her office, where file LPD 05214R was prominently placed on the desk. She wrote the initial phase summary report, Suspect arrested. DNA and physical evidence confirm concealment of crime. File transferred to Jefferson County prosecutor for indictment. Below the conclusion, she added a short line, "Finally, Louisville no longer has to call this a disappearance." Stepping out of the station, night had fallen. The city was quiet, only the wind whispering through the old streets of Jefferson Park. In the house where fire once blazed half a century ago, now only darkness remained, but that silence carried a different meaning. No longer a mystery, but the end of a crime hidden by time for far too long. The trial of Charles Henderson opened on November 15, 2005, at the Jefferson County Courthouse in Kentucky, marking the final phase of one of the oldest cases in Louisville judicial history. Courtroom 3, usually reserved for routine criminal cases, was packed that day with reporters, journalists, and curious citizens. Outside, local news outlets had set up cameras. Large headline boards scrolling, "Henderson case, 55 years later. Justice arrives." The defendant, Charles Henderson, 78 years old, was wheeled into the courtroom, frail, with snow-white hair, but still maintaining composure. He wore a dark suit, a worn old tie, his trembling hands resting on the wheelchair arms. Under the cold lights, his face seemed to carry the marks of time and silence that had lasted over half a century. Presiding over the trial was Judge Robert Milner, the same judge who had signed the arrest warrant in September. Prosecuting was lead prosecutor Diane Ralston, while defense counsel was James Merrick, specializing in cases involving psychological factors and elderly defendants. The trial unfolded in a solemn atmosphere, mixed with a sense of strangeness, an incident from 1950 retold in modern legal language. Prosecutor Ralston opened with a statement. "Today, we are not just trying a man, we are confronting a truth buried in ash for 55 years. Charles Henderson's parents did not disappear. They were killed and burned in the very home where they raised this son." Her voice was steady, without dramatics, but it silenced the entire room. Evidence was presented sequentially. First, DNA results. Blood on the handkerchief and house wall matched the Henderson family lineage, confirming the victims as Louis and Marjorie Henderson. Next, a Kentucky state forensic expert described the bone ash examination from under the floor, affirming 2 DNA samples, one male, one female, burned at high temperatures. They displayed reconstructed images of the fireplace area, explained the burning mechanism, and concluded the bodies were intentionally destroyed. Following that, the prosecutor presented the chimney repair receipt, evidence bearing the signatures Henderson and DNA matching the defendant. She pointed to the document preserved in a clear plastic frame, stating clearly, "This is not just a signature. This is proof that on the night before the two disappeared, the defendant prepared to repair what later became the crematorium for the bodies." The final witness to take the stand was Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, 92 years old, the neighbor who lived across from the Henderson. She was brought to court by ambulance and seated in a special chair. Though her voice was weak, she recounted the night of July 3, 1950, clearly. "I saw smoke, saw red firelight glowing through the window. No one lights a fireplace in summer. I remember that acrid smell. I'll never forget it for the rest of my life." When the prosecutor asked, "Are you sure the smoke came from which house?" she replied firmly, "The Hendersons, no mistake." Her answer left the gallery in silence. Defense attorney Merrick attempted to argue that the witness's memory could be faded after 55 years, and that no one directly witnessed the act of killing. He contended that Charles suffered memory decline, was unable to defend himself, and that everything is inference based on circumstantial evidence. However, the prosecution countered by pointing to the fully aligned chain of physical evidence, from DNA, ash, receipt, to contradictory statements from 1950 to the present. When invited to speak, Charles Henderson remained silent for most of the time. When the judge asked if he wished to say anything before the jury deliberated, he lifted his head, voice hoarse. "I've lived my whole life trying to forget, but everyone's right. Some things can't be buried." He offered no further explanation, only a slight nod, like a quiet admission. After 3 days of trial and 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Due to the passage of time, direct elements of first-degree murder were insufficient to prove intent to kill. However, they unanimously found Charles Henderson guilty of corpse destruction, evidence concealment, and obstruction of investigation, serious charges sufficient for a prison sentence. On November 21, 2005, Judge Milner pronounced the sentence. Based on the jury's verdict, defendant Charles Henderson is found guilty of obstructing investigation, concealing remains, and destroying criminal evidence. The court sentences him to 10 years imprisonment under Kentucky criminal law. The sentence was read in silence. Charles only bowed his head, neither protesting nor appealing. As he was wheeled out of the courtroom, he glanced back at the gallery one last time, his cloudy eyes no longer tense. Media coverage was extensive in the days that followed. Newspapers described it as the longest solved cold case in Louisville history, and a tragic story of crime and silence spanning 55 years. Many forensic experts viewed it as proof of DNA technology's progress in restoring justice for forgotten victims. Charles Henderson was transferred to Oldham County Detention Center to serve his sentence. He was placed in a special care unit for elderly inmates under medical supervision. In prison, he spoke little, almost never interacting with anyone. A corrections officer later recounted that he often sat by the window each afternoon, silent for hours. On February 4, 2006, just 3 months after sentencing, Charles Henderson died of heart failure in his sleep. The funeral was simple at the city cemetery, with no relatives in attendance. At the request of the Louisville Police Department, a portion of his ashes was retained in the case file as the final evidence closing the story that began in 1950. In March 2006, Chief Harold Pierce signed the official document, Case LPD 05214R, Henderson Homicide Investigation. Case solved, after 55 years. The nearly 600-page file, including all evidence, forensic results, court transcripts, and Frank Mallory's old notes, was sealed and archived in the Louisville Police Department's Historical Records Vault. In the investigation team's final meeting, Detective Dean spoke briefly, "We can't bring them back. But at least Louisville now knows the truth. Justice isn't lost, it's just slow to arrive." And on the back cover of the file, she handwritten added a line, "For Mallory, who never stopped believing." After more than half a century, the Henderson case was closed. No longer a mystery, but a lesson in memory, time, and the endurance of truth. In April 2006, 2 months after Charles Henderson's death in custody, the Louisville Police Department held an official press conference to announce the investigation results and close file LPD 05214R. The event took place in the second-floor auditorium of headquarters, where an old photo of Louis and Marjorie Henderson was placed on a wooden stand, beside it bold white lettering, "Case solved." After 55 years, Chief Harold Pierce presided, joined by Detective Margaret Dean and a representative from the Kentucky State Forensic Lab. The room fell quiet as Pierce opened with a brief statement, "This is not just closing a file, this is proof that justice can transcend time." In the final report, the Louisville Police Department noted the investigation's success stemmed from combining traditional detective work with modern forensic technology, particularly DNA testing and ground-penetrating radar. The report emphasized, without scientific advances and the careful preservation of records by previous generations of officers, the Henderson case would remain a question mark in Louisville's judicial history. The department also officially announced posthumous honors for Sergeant Frank Mallory, the original 1950 investigator, with a commendation medal recognizing his foresight and persistence in retaining samples, notebooks, and scene photos. Local and national media simultaneously republished the full story. The Courier-Journal ran a front-page headline, "The House That Held a Secret, Louisville's 55-year cold case finally solved." The multi-page article recounted the entire timeline from the 1950 disappearance, the initial investigation, decades of silence, to the DNA breakthrough. Time magazine and CNN also featured analyses, viewing it as a prime example of human effort and modern science delivering belated justice to victims. Forensic researchers regarded the Henderson case as a landmark. At the 2006 annual conference of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the Kentucky team presented a session titled Revisiting the 1950 Louisville Case, Integrating Historical Evidence and Modern DNA Techniques. The report generated significant buzz, cited by many outlets as a model for applying DNA analysis to long-preserved samples. In their conclusion, the investigators stressed, cold cases are not just work of the past, but a responsibility to truth, no matter how much time has passed. For the Louisville Police Department, the Henderson case became a symbol of professional dedication. In 2007, the Cold Case Review Unit was expanded with annual funding and officially renamed the Mallory Dean Task Force to honor the 2 generations of investigators who solved it. In the Kentucky Police Academy curriculum, the Henderson case was incorporated as a core module titled Case Preservation and Delayed Justice. Each year, cadets study sample preservation protocols, old evidence analysis, and the importance of detailed scene documentation, principles drawn from this case's failures and successes. Most Louisville residents received news of the case's closure with mixed emotions. Relief that justice was finally served, but sadness that the truth arrived too late. On Jefferson Park Road, the Henderson family's old house was designated a preserved site by the city, not for architectural value, but historical significance. A small bronze plaque was affixed to the gate, site of the Henderson case 1950, justice found 2005. Tourists occasionally stop to read it, while locals pass by quietly, as if the story has become part of Louisville's collective memory. Detective Margaret Dean, after completing all closure procedures, was invited to speak at the final memorial ceremony. She spoke slowly, her voice blending pride and sorrow. "We can't change the past, but we can ensure no one is forgotten in silence." The Henderson case taught us that justice, even if late, is still justice. Afterward, she retired, ending her 30-year career with this case as her final triumph. The official case closure document was signed on April 30, 2006, bearing a simple yet weighty conclusion: Henderson homicide investigation, case solved. Louisville Police Department acknowledges closure after 55 years. Those words ended a story spanning over half a century, where truth buried under ash was finally uncovered. From an anonymous 1950 disappearance to a 2005 conviction, the Henderson case stands as proof that time may erase everything except justice. The Henderson case in Louisville in 1950 is not just a 55-year investigation journey, but a mirror reflecting the value of truth, faith in justice, and modern society's responsibility to the past. In today's United States, where news, data, and memories are easily swept away by technology's pace, this case reminds us that nothing truly vanishes. Some things are merely hidden, waiting to be found. Sergeant Frank Mallory's persistence in 1950, documenting preserving ash samples and evidence, though unsolvable then, became the foundation for 2005 DNA technology to reveal the truth. The lesson here is the value of patience and integrity in work, even if results don't come in one's lifetime. In today's America, where every profession faces pressure to be fast, be new, this story reminds us that sometimes the most important thing is doing it right, not doing it early. Detective Margaret Dean represents a new generation that honors the old, blending modern science and respect for the past to achieve justice. This reflects modern American spirit, a nation constantly innovating yet grounded in memory and foundational ethics. Ultimately, the Henderson case teaches that justice may arrive late, but never too late, and that every honest act, however small, can become a piece of a greater truth. In today's society, where apathy is easier than responsibility, this story reminds us that just one person holding faith, like Mallory did, is enough to change an entire city's history. Thank you for following to the end of the story. The Henderson case proves that truth can be buried, but justice is never lost. Please subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more cold cases where the past still waits to speak.